Welcome to Galactic Nova Stories, where cosmic emotions come to life. Your journey begins now. The violet sun bled slowly into the jagged horizon of Altaris 9, the fractured skyline slicing the twilight into jagged ribbons of light. Long shadows unfurled across the rusted hulls of abandoned freighters, whispering secrets of a war too old to mourn. Inside the forgotten cargo hold of Aurora's Promise, the air was cold and brittle, carrying the scent of burnt ozone and old metal. Lysara huddled in the corner, knees drawn tightly to her chest, arms wrapped around herself as if she could hold her splintering world together through sheer force of will. Her body shook, small, involuntary tremors that rattled through her delicate frame. Her translucent skin, streaked with faint lines of bioluminescence, pulsed irregularly with her ragged breaths. She was exhausted beyond endurance, yet her eyes remained wide, unblinking, fixed on the heavy door she'd slipped through hours ago. Every scrape of the ship's cooling systems made her flinch. Every creak of settling metal sent fresh jolts of terror down her spine. They could still find me when she thought. Even here. Even now. Mira Hale stood just inside the threshold, frozen by the rawness of the scene before her. The ration pack in. Her hand suddenly felt absurd. How could food ever be enough to fix something so broken? Still, she moved carefully, slowly, making sure her movements were visible and non-threatening. She set the packet down on the floor halfway between them, her fingers lingering on it for a moment longer than necessary, as if offering more than just sustenance, offering presence, offering witness. "Safe," Mira said softly, voice low and rhythmic, like the way she used to calm the rescued feral children after planetary collapses. "You're safe now." The words floated into the stale air and hung there, uncertain. Lysara's eyes flickered to the packet, then to Mira, then away again. Her whole body seemed coiled, ready to bolt at any moment, even though there was nowhere left to run. Mira sat down cross-legged, placing herself on Lysara's level. The cold seeped through her uniform, but she didn't move, didn't flinch. She watched the alien woman's every tiny gesture, the twitch of a fingertip, the slight tilt of her head, and mirrored her stillness. The silence between them stretched, long and taut, until it hummed like a wire pulled too tight. Finally, Lysara shifted. Her arms loosened slightly from around her knees. She leaned forward just a fraction, the movement fragile and tentative, like a bird considering whether to trust a trembling hand. Her mouth opened, and for a heartbeat, nothing came. Just a hoarse intake of breath, a flicker of despair, and then, "Hey, sound, please." It wasn't just a word, it was everything. It was loneliness carved into syllables, it was grief sharpened into a blade. It was the final spark of a soul that had been burning too long in the dark. Mira inhaled sharply, as if the very atmosphere had shifted around that small shivering sound. Something deep inside her cracked open, something she hadn't realized she'd sealed away after the last evacuation mission, the last betrayal, the last goodbye. Lysara's voice was shaped strangely around the word, the pronunciation unfamiliar, the plea unmistakable. Her luminous eyes shimmered with the wet sheen of unshed tears, and for the first time Mira saw not an alien, not a subject, not a mystery. She saw a girl who had lost her entire world and still found the strength to ask for kindness. Mira slowly extended her hand, palm open, resting lightly on the floor. She didn't try to touch Lysara. She just let the offer hang there between them, silent and unwavering. Every great bond starts with a single moment of courage. Galactic Nova Stories is just beginning, and your support matters. If you love emotional, sci-fi tales, forbidden connections, and stories that stay with you, hit subscribe. It's free and it helps us bring more stories from the stars to you. A low groan of strained metal echoed through the cargo bay. The Aurora's Promise trembled, dust drifting down like a light snowfall. Lysara's entire body jerked, her muscles locking tight in a posture of pure survival instinct. Without thinking, Mira edged closer, speaking in soothing murmurs. Nonsense. Words meant only to wrap the moment in calm. She placed her other hand gently over Lysara's clenched fists. Lysara stiffened, but didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers unfurled slowly beneath Mira's touch, as if thawing from an endless winter. Mira could feel the tremors vibrating through her, could sense the monumental effort it took just to stay there, to not retreat back into herself. Lysara's skin was cool and faintly slick, the faint glow beneath it pulsing faster now, matching, Mira realized, the racing tempo of her own heart. The ship's emergency lights flickered, casting long, swaying shadows across the walls. Somewhere deep below decks, another explosion rumbled, a sound too distant to cause immediate fear, but close enough to serve as a grim reminder. They were not safe yet. Not truly. Mira squeezed Lysara's hand, very lightly. A promise. A vow. Spoken through the simple pressure of skin against skin. I am here, I won't let go. And Lysara, slowly, agonizingly, pressed her forehead against Mira's shoulder. Just for a second. Just long enough to say, without words, I believe you. The violet twilight outside faded into the steel grey of approaching night, and as darkness swallowed Altaris 9, two lost souls clung to the flickering light between them, an ember refusing to die, even at the end of all things. But deep beyond the shattered ruins of the spaceport, something ancient stirred, drawn by the scent of life, of hope, and of vulnerability. Their journey had just begun, and it would cost them more than either could yet imagine. The ship's engines groaned under the strain of the damaged power cores, and a cold draft slithered through the cargo bay's fractured seals. The Aurora's promise had seen better days. Now it felt less like a vessel and more like a sinking island, a last refuge already beginning to crumble. Mira remained still, her body half curled around Lysara in a protective posture. She could feel the tension vibrating through the alien girl's muscles, as if she was moments from bolting, but there was also a tentative weight in the way Lysara leaned against her, a desperate anchoring. Neither spoke. Words felt too brittle for this moment. Mira's mind churned beneath her outward calm, cataloguing everything she knew and everything she didn't. Lysara's physiology, her needs, her fears. They were mysteries wrapped inside fragile flesh. Whatever trauma she had fled from out there among the skeletal ruins of Altaris 9, it had cut her so deeply that only one word had survived the wreckage of her voice. Please. A soft sound, almost inaudible, slipped from Lysara's throat, somewhere between a sigh and a whimper. Mira instinctively shifted, draping one side of her jacket over the girl's trembling shoulders. Lysara flinched at first, then went unnaturally still. Her breath held tight inside her chest. She doesn't know if touch is safety or violence, Mira realized, a knot forming in her stomach. Maybe she's never known. Very slowly, Mira withdrew her hands, giving Lysara space to decide, space to reclaim her own agency. After a long beat of silence, Lysara inched closer, drawing the offered warmth around herself with trembling fingers. She was choosing trust, piece by fragile piece. Outside, another muffled boom shook the vessel, distant but ominous. Mira's comm unit crackled at her hip, only static. No messages from the bridge. No signs of the others. We might be alone on this ship, Mira thought grimly. Or worse, not alone. She tilted her head, listening. Beyond the groaning of strained metal and the far-off rumble of collapsing ruins, there was something else now. A faint, rhythmic clicking sound. It echoed in the air ducts and ventilation shafts. Predatory, deliberate. Mira felt her skin prickle with warning. She knew that sound. Harvesters. Once the machines had been tools, drones designed to salvage wreckage and gather resources, but, abandoned and twisted by centuries of electromagnetic storms and corrupted programming, they had evolved into something else entirely. Hunters. Anything that moved, anything that lived, they reaped, and now they were coming. Lysara tensed, sensing the shift in Mira's breathing even before she spoke. Her pupils widened, luminous with fear. Mira met her gaze steadily, voice a low whisper. "We have to move." Lysara didn't answer. She simply nodded, small, almost imperceptible. But it was enough. Mira rose first, muscles protesting the sudden movement. She reached down, extending a hand toward Lysara without grabbing or forcing, offering, not demanding. For a heartbeat, the girl hesitated. Then, her fingers brushed Mira's, feather-light at first, then clenching tight with a sudden, desperate strength. Together, they slipped through the fractured bay, Mira leading the way by instinct more than sight. The emergency lights flickered and died behind them, swallowing the cargo hold in darkness. They moved in silence, their footsteps barely whispering across the deck plates. Every few steps, Mira would glance back, making sure Lysara was still there. Each time she was met with wide, terrified eyes and a spark of something else buried beneath the fear, determination. As they edged through a broken service hatch into a narrow maintenance corridor, the cold deepened. Their breath misted in the air. Panels hung loose from the walls, swinging slightly, making hollow metallic thunks that seemed far too loud in the oppressive stillness. The clicking was louder now, closer. Mira pressed her back against a wall, pulling Lysara in front of her, shielding her body with her own. Her mind raced through possibilities, escape routes, hiding places, weapons, calculating and discarding options in rapid succession. In the dim light, she caught the faintest shimmer of movement in the corridor ahead, a silver glint like an insect's carapace. The harvesters had found them. Lysara's grip tightened painfully on Mira's sleeve. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no sound came. Only that word, that one desperate word, seemed to exist in her arsenal. Mira squeezed her hand, willing her to be still. "Trust me," she thought fiercely. "Just a little longer." She scanned the corridor, eyes landing on a narrow vent shaft, partially obscured by fallen debris. It would be a tight fit, too small for an adult human to navigate easily, but maybe, just maybe, enough for them both if they squeezed through. The clicking grew louder, sharper now, punctuated by mechanical hisses. No more time. No more second. Chances. Mira knelt swiftly, yanking loose the debris with both hands. Sharp metal bit into her palms, drawing blood, but she didn't stop. She didn't even register the pain, only the primal drumbeat of survival pounding in her veins. When the path was clear, she looked up at Lysara, whose face was pale and strained, but set with fierce resolve. Without hesitation, Mira cupped the girl's face between her hands for a fleeting second, a touch soft but urgent. "You can do this," Mira breathed. "We can do this." And for the first time since they met, Lysara gave a tiny, jerky nod, not of fear but of belief. Mira helped her crawl into the shaft first, pushing the emergency ration pack through after her. Then, with one last glance toward the oncoming death, she slipped inside herself, sealing them in darkness. The metal was cold against her skin. The air smelled of rust and ancient decay. But beside her, Lysara's faint glow lit the space just enough to see and enough to feel the thrum of life still fighting beside her. Outside, the harvesters' clicking footsteps prowled the corridors. Patient and merciless, but inside that narrow passage pressed close together, Mira and Lysara carried something rarer than survival. They carried a fragile, flickering hope. The narrow vent shaft was cramped, its walls pressing in on them as the dim glow from Lysara's skin illuminated the passage. Mira's breath came in, shallow, measured bursts, each inhalation muffled by the tightness of the space. The metal beneath them was cold, unforgiving, but the real danger lay outside. The harvesters now searching the ship with relentless efficiency, their insectoid limbs scraping along the hull like predatory whispers. Mira kept moving, pushing herself forward, though every inch felt like a small eternity. Lysara followed close behind, her small hands gripping the narrow edges of the vent. Mira could hear the soft scrape of Lysara's breath too, the sound barely audible beneath the overwhelming hum of the ship's failing systems. But it was enough to remind her that the girl was still there, alive, still with her. "You can do this, we can do this, just a little longer." It had been a lifetime since Mira had relied so completely on someone else for survival. In all her years of piloting, of navigating the chaos and cruelty of the galaxy, she had always been alone in the end, fighting, surviving, existing without ever truly connecting. But with Lysara, Something different stirred within her. A spark of something that made her more than just a soldier, more than just a survivor. Mira paused briefly, her heart thumping in her chest as she heard the clicking grow louder, closer. The harvesters were already scouring the deck nearby, the dekai. Air felt heavier now, as if the weight of the ship itself had intensified with the realization that time was slipping away. "Keep moving," Mira whispered, her voice barely a murmur against the thudding of her pulse. Lysara didn't answer, but Mira could feel the alien's presence, just a few inches behind her, close enough to hear the faint, trembling exhale of fear. They were two beings from different worlds, but in that moment, in that darkened vent shaft, they were one, a bond formed not from blood or lineage, but from the simple, unspoken need to survive. Mira slid forward again, her hands pressing against the cold metal. The narrow tunnel twisted and bent at odd angles, forcing them to move in awkward, contorted positions. Every now and then she could hear the soft whimper from Lysara, a small, involuntary sound that made Mira's chest tighten in sympathy. She knew the girl was terrified, but even more than that, Lysara was exhausted. She had fought for her life. For too long, Mira gritted her teeth, pushing herself further, moving with purpose. Her thoughts flickered back to the moment in the cargo hold when Lysara had whispered that one word, "Please." The vulnerability in that simple plea was a weight Mira couldn't easily dismiss. She had felt it resonate deep within her, the isolation, the yearning for something more, for someone to see her, to hear her. But now wasn't the time to dwell on it. The harvesters were still out there, and Mira knew that in this confined space, if they were discovered, they would be trapped. They reached a slight bend in the shaft. The tunnel opened slightly, offering a little more breathing room. Mira dared a glance over her shoulder. Lysara was still there, her face partially hidden by the shadows of her hair, her eyes reflecting a steady, determined light. Despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, Lysara was fighting for survival, for something more than just this endless running. Mira could see the flicker of something brighter, something alive in those eyes. But she couldn't allow herself to linger on it. Not yet. "Stay close," Mira murmured, her voice soft but filled with an underlying intensity. She didn't look back again. She couldn't afford to. They couldn't risk making any more noise, but the tightness in the air was not just from their surroundings. There was an unspoken tension now, building between them, thick and palpable. They weren't just running from the harvesters anymore. Mira was starting to realize that she wasn't just keeping Lysara alive for the sake of survival. There was something else, something deeper that pulled at her, that made her want to protect the alien at all costs. The air in the shaft seemed to grow colder, as if their proximity to the harvesters was drawing the temperature down. Mira could feel the shivers running through her own body, despite her thick flight suit. And Lysara's bioluminescence flickered in quick pulses, like a heartbeat racing in panic. At that moment, a soft click echoed from the tunnel ahead, sharp and distinct. Mira froze, her heart stopping for a beat. She barely dared to breathe, her fingers tightening on the shaft's cold metal walls. The harvesters were close. Mira's eyes darted to Lysara, who had instinctively frozen beside her. The two of them, motionless in the dark, didn't make a sound. The clicking was closer now, so close that Mira could hear it in her bones, each tap like a countdown ticking down the seconds. She could feel Lysara's panic growing, could hear the quiet hitching of her breath. It was becoming harder to keep her calm. The girl's fear was thick, almost suffocating. "Don't panic. Stay calm." Mira gently placed a hand on Lysara's arm, steadying her in the darkness. The touch was subtle, but Lysara responded immediately, her shoulders relaxing just a little. It was as if the simple pressure of Mira's hand was enough to anchor her, to bring her back from the edge of that overwhelming panic. Mira's voice was a soft whisper, almost a prayer. "Just a little longer. Stay with me." Lysara nodded, though the motion was faint, barely perceptible in the shadows. She was trembling, her entire body a series of jagged movements, as if every instinct inside her screamed for escape. But she stayed. She listened. Mira could feel the shifting weight of the situation, the stark realization that their survival wasn't just about evading the harvesters anymore. It was about the bond that was quietly being forged between them. It wasn't spoken. It was held in every touch, every glance, every breath they took together in the dark. Suddenly the clicking stopped. The silence that followed was a slow, unbearable moment. Mira's breath was steady now, though the adrenaline still coursed through her veins. She dared to peek out from the narrow bend in the shaft, eyes straining for any sign of the harvesters. There, in the faint light filtering through the vents, she saw the shape of the mechanical creatures, moving with silent precision. They had passed them, just barely. Mira's heart skipped a beat. She slowly exhaled, her body sagging in relief. But Lysara's grip on her arm tightened, and Mira turned to face her, just as she saw the terror flash in the alien's eyes. "We're not safe yet," Lysara whispered, the first full sentence she had spoken since they entered the vent. Her voice was raw, trembling with both fear and something else, something Mira could not quite decipher. Mira nodded slowly. The terror that had settled into the pit of her stomach was not gone, but something in Lysara's voice had shifted something within her. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was hope. They were still alive. For now. The momentary relief in the darkened vent shaft was a fleeting illusion. Lysara's words echoed in Mira's mind, fragile as glass. "We're not safe yet." Mira couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just the harvesters that threatened them now. Something else had shifted between them, something unspoken, something delicate. The bond they shared wasn't just about survival. It was about discovery, trust. But the dark corridors of the Aurora's promise weren't the place for such revelations. They were confined, trapped in the half-light of a ship slipping into ruin, filled with the smell of burnt circuits and dying power cells. The harvesters were out there. They wouldn't stop until they found them. Mira moved again, her body tight, every instinct screaming to keep them moving forward. Lysara followed closely, her bioluminescence flickering softly in the darkness, casting long, strange shadows against the cold metal walls. Despite the glow, there was an eerie silence in the vent shaft. The only sounds were their breath, the faint hum of the ship's failing systems, and the slow, heavy beat of their hearts. The tunnel wound further, narrowing until Mira had to turn sideways to squeeze through. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she forced herself to keep going, the air growing heavier with each step. She dared not speak, afraid that even her voice might draw attention. Behind her, Lysara's movements were more sluggish now. Mira glanced back, catching a glimpse of the girl's pale face, a mixture of exhaustion, fear, and something deeper. The uncertainty in Lysara's eyes was almost unbearable. She was pushing herself beyond the limits of what Mira knew any being could bear. Yet she kept moving. For Mira, there was no question of stopping. She couldn't stop. Not for Lysara. Not now. They finally reached another shaft junction, and Mira paused, listening intently. The clicking sound of the harvesters had faded into a tense silence, but the air was thick with the hum of the ship's systems, now barely functional. They're searching. "Not far now. They'll find us if we don't keep moving." Mira's mind raced through possibilities. They couldn't stay here. They couldn't go back, and they couldn't stay ahead of the harvesters forever. The ship was dying, and time was running out. She turned, looking at Lysara, really looking at her, for the first time since they had started this desperate flight. The glow from the girl's skin had dimmed, her energy spent, and her breaths came in shallow gasps. The delicate pulse of her bioluminescence was fading, and with it the only source of light they had in the suffocating dark. Lysara caught Mira's gaze. There was a vulnerability there, but also something else, something stronger than fear. Mira couldn't quite name it, but it held her there, suspended between the knowledge of the immediate threat and the deep, gnawing pull of something they both knew was coming. Lysara's voice, faint and fragile, broke the silence. "They're coming." The words sent a cold shock through Mira's veins. She had known it in her gut, had sensed it as surely as the harvester's proximity, but hearing it from Lysara made it real. Mira nodded. "We don't have much time." They had reached a large maintenance hatch, barely hanging on its hinges, leading into the ship's lower cargo decks. It was a place Mira had only seen in passing during her initial sweep of the ship, but now it was their only option. Mira's mind was sharp, calculating. She would get them to the escape pods. There was no other choice. But the truth was, the more time they spent in the bowels of this ship, the less chance they had of surviving. Every step, every turn was one closer to an unknown danger. Mira pushed the hatch open, her pulse pounding in her ears as she motioned for Lysara to follow. "Stay close." Lysara nodded, but Mira could sense the hesitation in the girl's movements, the subtle shift in her posture. She was tired. Her body was shutting down, even though her mind still screamed for survival. For a moment, Mira wondered if she was making a mistake, if she was pushing too hard, too fast. But then Lysara caught up to her, her glowing eyes flashing with determination, and Mira knew. She knew that no matter how much this terrified her, no matter how impossible this escape seemed, she wasn't alone anymore. The cargo decks were eerily quiet, but the low hum of the ship's power systems vibrated through the floor, a constant reminder that they weren't the only ones moving through these hallways. They moved quickly now, each step more deliberate, each moment more precious. Mira's mind raced with escape plans, strategies, and contingencies, but she couldn't shut out the growing feeling that something else was wrong. In the distance, she heard the unmistakable sound of heavy boots. Someone else was out there. Her hand shot out, grabbing Lysara's arm to pull her behind a cargo crate, just as the shadows of movement reached their line of sight. The figures in the hallway were not harvesters. They were human. Mira's heart leapt in her chest. Was it a rescue team? Were they here to help? She didn't dare make a sound. The figures were moving swiftly, too swiftly to be friendly. They were scanning the area, weapons at the ready. Mira's instinct screamed that something was wrong. Lysara, pressed against her, was trembling. Her face was pale, and her body was so still, so tense, that Mira could feel the fear radiating off of her in waves. "Stay quiet," Mira whispered urgently, her breath hitching in her chest. She was barely breathing herself, knowing that the wrong move, the wrong sound, could be the end of them both. The figures in the corridor stopped directly in front of them, and Mira's pulse spiked. They were so close, close enough that Mira could see the insignia on their uniforms, a symbol she didn't recognize. A military crest of some kind, but not one she'd ever seen in her travels. Who are they? The figures scanned the area, and, for a moment, Mira thought they might have heard something, but then one of the figures stepped forward, their voice low and muffled behind their helmet. "Move, we'll find them." The others nodded, and just as quickly as they had arrived, they moved down the corridor, their boots echoing through the silence. Mira and Lysara didn't move a muscle for what felt like an eternity. Only when the sound of retreating footsteps faded completely did Mira release the breath she'd been holding. "Are you okay?" she whispered, turning to Lysara. The girl nodded, but Mira could see the fear still etched across her face, the same fear that was now crawling its way up Mira's spine. They weren't alone on the ship. Not only were the harvesters hunting them, but someone, or something, else was here too. The ship's corridors had become a twisted labyrinth of uncertainty, and every corner they turned only brought more danger. Mira could feel the oppressive weight of it all, pressing in from all sides, like the ship itself was closing in on them, ready to consume them whole. But it wasn't just the physical danger that gripped her heart. It was the growing realization that they were no longer simply fighting for survival. They were fighting for something more. They'd reached the last escape pod bay, but the door to the launch chamber was sealed tight. Mira's heart raced as she tried to hack into the system, her hands flying over the console in a desperate attempt to override the lockdown. Her mind was sharp, focused, but she couldn't shake the nagging sense of dread that had been building for the past several minutes. They weren't alone. Lysara stood a few paces behind, her bioluminescent glow dimmed now, the flicker of light, pulsing slowly in time with her ragged breathing. Her eyes, wide and exhausted, followed Mira's every movement. There was something in the girl's gaze, a silent plea, an unspoken question that mirrored Mira's own unease. "Come on, come." Mira muttered, her fingers trembling as she typed in override commands. The seconds stretched long. We don't have time for this, she thought. She looked over her shoulder at Lysara, their eyes meeting for a moment. There was a vulnerability there, now something Mira had never expected to see in the girl. Lysara wasn't just the mysterious alien from another world anymore. She was someone who had become a part of Mira's world. No, that's not it. Mira's thoughts shifted, as if the realization had cracked something open inside her. Lysara hadn't become part of her world. She had changed it. Lysara... Mira breathed, the tension in her chest rising. Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. She had to do this. For both of them. Lysara didn't answer, her expression unreadable, but her bioluminescence flickered erratically, faster, brighter. She was scared, but there was something else too, something soft between them now. Suddenly the warning lights flashed, and Mira's heart skipped. She was running out of time. The harvesters were closing in, and she could hear their metallic footsteps echoing from the maintenance shafts. Too close, too damn close. Stay behind me, Mira said, her voice barely a whisper. She didn't wait for Lysara's reply, stepping forward as the door to the pod bay finally gave way, the metal groaning as it slowly slid open. Inside, the sleek emergency escape pods stood like sentinels, waiting for those fortunate or desperate enough to board. Mira rushed toward the nearest pod, her eyes darting over the controls. But just as she reached it, a low mechanical voice cut through the air. You're not leaving. The words were cold, flat, spoken by a figure emerging from the shadows. Mira froze, her heart pounding. It was one of the soldiers, the ones who had passed them earlier. But this one was different. He wasn't wearing a standard military uniform. No. This man had the cold, methodical air of someone else, someone with far darker intentions. Mira's pulse quickened, but she didn't show it. She had learned that much. Never reveal fear. Never show weakness. What do you want? Mira demanded, her voice sharp. The soldier didn't move, but his eyes were cold, calculating. You're not leaving this ship, Captain, the soldier said. He lifted his arm, revealing a sleek metallic weapon. We have orders. Mira's mind raced. The weight of his words settled over her like a storm cloud. Orders. You're with the harvesters? Lysara's voice cracked, fear tinged with disbelief. The soldier's eyes shifted toward her for a moment, as if taking in her alien form. Then he sneered. No, we have our own agenda. The soldier took a step closer, and Mira instinctively placed herself between him and Lysara, her posture rigid, protective. Stay away from her. The soldier smirked, eyes glinting with a knowing, bitter amusement. She's already been marked, Captain. Her fate is sealed, and so is yours. Mira's breath hitched. Marked. The word sent a chill straight to her bones. She could feel... Lysara's body stiffened behind her, the fear leaking through her facade, and Mira's resolve hardened. No one gets to decide her fate, Mira said, her voice low, deadly. We make our own choices. The soldier laughed, the sound hollow, devoid of anything human. You think you can protect her? He looked at Lysara as if she were a mere object, something to be discarded. You think anyone in this galaxy will care about an alien's life? Mira felt the coldness of his words wrap around her heart, but she didn't flinch. Her hands tightened into fists. I don't care what the galaxy thinks. A beat of silence passed between them, and then the soldier lunged. Mira was ready. She sidestepped the attack with a fluid movement, her training kicking in like muscle memory. She grabbed the soldier's wrist, twisting it sharply, forcing him back into the wall. He grunted, but the weapon in his hand fell to the floor. Lysara's bioluminescence flickered wildly now, casting chaotic light over the scene. She gasped, and Mira knew that the girl wasn't just scared for herself. She was scared for Mira, for everything they had fought for. With a swift motion, Mira kicked the soldier's weapon out of his reach. He staggered back, cursing. But she wasn't done. She drew her own sidearm, small but lethal, and aimed it at him. The soldier's eyes narrowed. You're not going to make it out of here alive, Captain. But Mira didn't flinch. She pressed the barrel of the gun against his chest, unwavering. Try me. For a long moment, The soldier seemed to consider her, his lip curling in a grimace. Then, with a violent motion, he turned and fled, disappearing into the dark corridors of the ship. Mira stood there, breathing heavily, adrenaline still coursing through her. But it was over. For now. Lysara approached her slowly, her footsteps tentative, as if afraid to draw closer. But when she reached Mira's side, the girl's trembling hand brushed against hers, and for the first time Mira let the contact linger. She looked at Lysara, who was still shaking, but there was something in her eyes, something soft, something trusting. Thank you," Lysara whispered, her voice barely audible. Mira looked down at their intertwined hands. She didn't know what would happen next. There was still the matter of the harvesters, and the ship was falling apart beneath them. But for the first time in a long while, Mira felt something warm in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, they could make it out of this together. Mira glanced at the escape pods. Then she looked at Lysara, who was watching her with quiet hope. "Let's go," Mira said, her voice steady, but filled with a new kind of certainty. And as they stepped into the pod, the hatch closing behind them, Mira realized that whatever happened next, whatever dangers awaited them in the unknown void, they would face them together. No more running, no more pretending. They were ready for whatever came next. If this story moved you, share it with someone who loves powerful tales. From distant worlds, don't forget to like and let us know in the comments, what would you have done?